Hello friends, I'm very excited to be back with the educational video content. Recently we've reached a milestone of 25,000 subscribers on YouTube and a new record high on Patreon. As my way of saying thank you to all of my supporters, I'm committing to bringing these long format detailed educational videos back on a regular basis, especially with so many of you requesting for more educational content. Today I will break down my full practice routine and explain exactly how it changed since the start of a pandemic because of my drastically altered performance schedule. All the materials used in this video will be available for download at patreon.com/Matonizz. Make sure to check it out if you'd like to support the channel, as well as get cool perks like educational materials, new arrangements, original compositions, MP3 downloads, bonus content, and cool clothing. But most importantly, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the notification bell if you haven't already, and share this video with your friends. All the positive engagement on my video content does impact this channel in a very significant way, so I would really appreciate that. Lastly, before we move on, if you're interested in online lessons, feel free to get in touch with me through euphonium.legends@gmail.com, and I'll gladly forward you all the relevant information regarding the online lessons. With that out of the way, let's move on to my full practice routine and all the reasoning behind it. For those who have not seen it yet, make sure to check out my previous full routine video. I've explained in detail why I used the exercises I used and how I applied the practice split based on my concert schedule. I would not recommend other players switching to the same exact routine that I currently use, since it's tailored specifically to my needs and skill level. However, the way I structure my routine, the way I select my exercises, and the way I practice them is something you should try and rationalize in your own playing to achieve the most efficient progress and prepare yourself for relevant auditions, competitions, and concert scenarios. With that out of the way, let's look at my current routine. Considering that the concert schedule is not a point of consideration anymore, the biggest adjustment I've made was getting rid of my routine split. Even though I'm constantly learning new pieces for recording purposes, fatigue is not really an issue because you can always do multiple takes, obviously, as well as rest upon your needs. Also, I feel like the level of my skill set has become very balanced in all the areas, to the point where I'm not necessarily trying to learn all that many new tricks, but rather refine everything that I've learned throughout my career to be as functional and consistent as possible. With that in mind, the selection of the exercises that I use on a daily basis did not change all that much outside of the adjustments to the application. One thing that remains the same is the breathing exercises. I always start my practice session with a lung capacity exercise. For those who might not be familiar with the term lung capacity or lung function, short explanation: you might have lungs that could hold, let's say, 6 liters of air, just to give an example, but you might be only utilizing 3 of them. Most of you probably know that having a sufficient amount of air is a crucial part of brass playing. Outside of physical exercising, taking full breaths at a controlled pace will be the best way to improve your lung capacity. I personally love using a spirometer device called Voldyne 5000. It allows me to visually see the optimal inhale speed determined by medical experts, track if I'm making any progress to my lung capacity, as well as it is very wall friendly. I'm not a huge individual and my lungs are not that big, so I have to work hard on my breathing exercises consistently so I could play without negative impact on phrasing or technique for that matter. I take 10 breaths with Voldyne 5000 spirometer every single day to start my practice session. Next, I move on to a resistance exercise for breathing. This is where I incorporate an Ultrabreathe device. It allows me to adjust the resistance for both my inhale and exhale. There are multiple ways you can use this device to tailor your needs, but the way I approach it is by actually increasing the resistance quite a bit and not necessarily trying to take quick breaths, but rather control a long, full breath while under a substantially more resistance in comparison to my regular way of breathing, even when my mouth is covered by a mouthpiece. In order to keep your shoulders and neck neutral and relaxed, I am forced to slow down my breathing and embrace the resistance. I take 10 of these breaths every single day as a second breathing exercise of my routine. One of the most important things in my daily practice is establishing a quality buzz before I move on to more complex exercises. There is a huge physical element involved in brass playing, and it's easy to fall into a rabbit hole where you start your practice and it's gradually getting worse with each exercise you play, as opposed to the desired outcome, which is feeling more comfortable, stronger, and more solid with every step you add. Facial muscle fatigue is often ignored because it's not as obvious and easy to identify like sore calves after a good day of sprinting, for example. Just think about this for a second. If your legs are sore after a workout, just a simple walking motion will be labored, less controlled, and every step you take will feel as if your feet were made out of stone. On those days, you would likely not consider just going for your normal 5-mile running routine. You would probably start with a lot of light walking and some stretches until the soreness decreases, your muscles relax, and you regain your normal sense of motion. And even then, you would probably be very reserved with your running intensity. Same thing happens with not only your breathing, when on some days taking a breath feels like someone is putting a tight belt on your waist, but also your face, when every note feels very labored and extremely tight. Unlike your big muscle groups, it's way harder to identify this issue with your facial muscles. The reason I'm bringing this up is because the following 2 exercises in my routine are always dedicated to identifying the state of my face and ensuring that I'm capable of creating lip vibration with the smallest amount of embouchure tension possible. This step is crucial for my ability to maintain control, sound, range, and flexibility as the routine progresses. I start by taking a slow inhale followed by an exhale as if I was blowing air into a mouthpiece shank, which I'll explain to you in just a second. What I'm looking for from my inhale is a completely relaxed, disengaged face, similar to breathing in a pant-like motion, just like a dog would when it's feeling hot. Most of us are used to working our muscles in sync, and when one muscle group gets tight, or in other words engages, so do normally the others. That's why I start my breathing process by keeping my face loose, which allows me to keep my neck and shoulders loose, eliminating unnecessary muscle engagement or tension, in other words, from my breathing pattern. I supplement that by keeping my inhale speed slow and steady so I'm not overloading the diaphragm by too fast of a breath. Next thing I'm focusing on is making sure that there is no suspense, or in other words, no hesitation between my inhale and exhale. Air is constantly moving in or out during the pattern. Suspense will introduce undesired tension and lack of control. Therefore, I'm trying to have the smoothest transition between inhale and exhale as possible. As I mentioned prior, establishing a buzz with least amount of tension is going to be a crucial part for retaining control, flexibility, range, and sound as we proceed further into my routine. I'm trying to get comfortable with exhaling with the aperture space, which would turn my air immediately into a free buzz as soon as I increase the tension just a tiny bit. This gives me a reminder to what the sensation in my face, in my mouth, and with my air should feel like when I actually buzz. In other words, my goal is to make sure that the difference in sensation between me simply blowing air versus me buzzing is so small I could barely tell a difference. Finding that borderline free buzz aperture allows me to understand what the minimal amount of tension in my face should be when I start the free buzz. Since it's very hard to be in such a precise control of your lips, I always try to find a more relatable reference point to think about. In this case, I imagine exhaling directly into the shank of the mouthpiece because it centers my aperture exactly the way I'd like it to be as I buzz or later on play. I am also trying to close my lips in a very controlled way. The tendency that I see with many younger players is to either breathe with a very tight face to begin with or closed lips in a frantic, uncontrolled way, both for the fear of losing centering and chipping a note after a breath, and both ironically often resulting into actually chipping a note. Remember, goal is to establish the most tension-free buzz possible. If your face is too tight before you even start buzzing, or if you end up closing your aperture too shut as a result of uncontrolled lip movement, you will not have that great of a chance for either range or flexibility as you start going deeper into your routine. Despite how silly this might sound, establishing this simple breathing pattern will be one of the most important factors determining how great your sound, range, and all the extended techniques can become. Remember, the key is to control your air speed and body movement on your inhale with hesitation-free transition to exhale, while your lips close to the desired aperture space in a very comfortable, controlled, tension-free, but at the same time quick manner as you start your exhale. I normally take 5 of these breaths that I refer to as the breath control exercises. After that, I follow up with an extension of this exercise which has the same exact breath pattern with an addition of a free buzz at the end. I take a slow, controlled inhale with a relaxed face. I sustain it at a consistent pace up until I feel my lungs have filled up, and then transition smoothly into an exhale, with my lips gently closing to the aperture space that I established in my previous exercise. As soon as I start feeling my lips are formed in the correct position, which is on the cusp of a buzz, I very slowly increase the tension in my embouchure just a tiny bit to start my free buzz. I repeat this pattern 5 times to make sure I am comfortable with staying relaxed while my lips are buzzing. I don't have a preset pitch to start on, but it's usually something mid to low register based on how my face feels that day. If you've never done this before, you might find it uncomfortable to not only breathe and move your face in such a controlled fashion, but also to maintain composure as the buzz begins. I'm making sure that the very moment I start buzzing, I maintain neutral space inside of my mouth, same as if I'm simply resting with my mouth closed. I'm also trying to avoid any sudden, uncontrolled increments of tension as the free buzz begins. I cannot emphasize the importance of developing this coordinated inhale, exhale, and lip closing motion enough. It might appear like a very simple task when you look at it at first glance. However, if you try this yourself, you might realize that this simple pattern requires a lot of control to be done correctly. I can't recall the number of my students who improved their tone, endurance control, and got rid of issues like facial tremors by practicing and getting good at coordinating this simple motion. That's the reason why I felt the need to get into so much detail describing these 2 simple exercises. They play a huge role in determining the quality of the rest of my practice session. Next exercise is a combination of a free buzz and mouthpiece buzzing. I play 4 scales: major, natural minor, harmonic minor, and melodic minor. On my way up, I free buzz and mouthpiece buzz on my way down. Once again, I don't have a specific scale I like to start with, but it usually begins with something low, followed by a higher pitched scale, then back down and up again to finish the exercise. I maintain the same controlled breathing motion in this exercise and try to maintain similar sensation as I begin buzzing with mouthpiece. You might notice a change in the way you breathe unintentionally as soon as you put a mouthpiece on your face. As soon as your mouthpiece starts touching your lips, you might feel an urge to start increasing tension in your face before you even begin buzzing. This will set you up for a tighter, less controlled buzz before you even had a chance to do it. I always try and completely ignore the sensation of mouthpiece touching my face. In reality, you don't have as much control of your lips as you think you do. In the vast majority of cases, your mouthpiece will end up in a position based on your teeth structure, and unless you have an abnormally off-centered positioning, try to make yourself ignore the mouthpiece and focus on airstream instead. Rather than thinking about your inhale turning into a buzz, think of it as an inhale turning to exhale. You'll notice that not only you get a faster response time, opposite to what your initial instinct might be, but you'll also be able to control your buzz through controlling your airstream rather than adjusting the tension in your face. In a way, I'm paying more attention to getting the buzz with the sensation as close to simply gently blowing an airstream rather than getting the buzz itself. On days that I'm more fatigued, I'd rather fail and restart this pattern until I get it with the desired technique than simply try getting all the pitches for the sake of not missing a note. Remember, I'm not practicing buzzing but rather air and aperture control through the exercise of Freebuzz and mouthpiece buzz. Next, I move on to lip bending. Lip bending is another great tone building exercise that will help you strengthen your jaw muscles as well as allow you to learn how to control your aperture space and airspeed. This is one of the exercises that you'll notice I adjusted slightly since my last routine video. I went from bending multiple half steps to simply bending a half step. When I was in concert season with the River City Brass, my main priority was to have a routine that will prepare me for learning and playing new pieces with minimal preparation time, as well as having the most amount of endurance possible for long streaks of performances in a row. Since that is obviously not the case anymore and probably won't be for quite a while, I scaled back on the physical element of bending to making sure that the off-centered bent note has a beautiful tone, the bend itself is slow and under as much control as possible, as well as I'm in tune with my real tuba sound drone. I recorded these live instrument drones, which by the way come along with this book, because the more I started recording myself, the more I started realizing that the overtones in brass instruments in comparison to a bland drone sound that you can get from the internet apps change the perception of intonation quite a bit. Live brass sounds makes it harder to recognize good intonation in comparison to playing with a cleaner string or piano sound. From a technical standpoint, the goal is to maintain the correct breathing pattern as well as to drop my jaw down and out in a slow, controlled fashion as I bend the note. You'll notice that the higher you go in pitch, the more controlled you have to be with your jaw movement, otherwise you'll drop a partial. That being said, don't be afraid to lose the centering just for safety purpose. Try to look for optimal space that gives you an open, resonant sound without losing control, even if that means you have to restart each pattern a few times to understand the correct sensation. Again, you're not practicing lip bending but rather aperture and airspeed control through the use of lip bending exercise. Following exercise is a range exercise. However, the main area of focus once again will be control. Control in breathing pattern, control in breath management, control in aperture, and control in intonation. Each time I'm taking a breath, the goal is to relax my embouchure for a brief moment. This will allow me to take more air during small period of time without losing control through unnecessary tension as I restart the buzz after the breath. This is the first exercise in my routine where I'm introducing a metronome, at 60 beats per minute in this case. Tempo variable will have a significant impact on your breathing pattern, and three things that I'm always looking for in my breathing is having enough air at the right time with control. It is much easier to accomplish that when you don't have to accommodate to a crucial element such as timing, and there are very few moments in band playing when you have the luxury of breathing at your own pace. As soon as the tempo is being introduced and you have a limited amount of rest for a breath, you might end up in a scenario where you either breathe too late and don't have a sufficient amount of air to successfully play through the required phrases, or on the opposite end, you might start breathing too early and fill up too soon, introducing a suspense which will significantly reduce your ability to control your exhale speed. It is important to learn when and how long you need to breathe in for in order to have enough air at the right time with control. However, it is just as important to learn how to operate on both full tank of air and less than full tank of air. Circumstances in the piece of music will dictate which of those two scenarios you will find yourself at, and you want to be prepared for both cases. The reason why I love this particular exercise is because it's long and rangy enough to where you have to take a breath before starting at the very low register, then potentially take another breath quarter way through without losing control, and later take a breath after your highest note, which will make it harder to relax your face for a good, slow, open breath, and then restart at the same high note right after. If you violate one of those fundamental areas that I established in the third and fourth exercises, you will more than likely end up either building too much tension for the top note to speak, or chip the top note on your way down due to suspense in breath or lack of control in aperture centering after that breath midway through. You will also need to utilize as much time during your breath to take as much air as possible while keeping that slow, dark, open inhale. You will notice that during breaths in the middle of a phrase, I sometimes steal a little bit of time from the upcoming note, almost turning it to a 16th note rather than an 8th note. Later, when you play similar phrases in your slow solo lines, this would be a good circumstance to bring in a musical element such as rubato to accompany your technical needs. Again, just another tool that you should learn how to utilize in your playing. Outside of the breathing pattern, this exercise is also great in a sense that it requires a very high level of control in your aperture spacing in order to sustain vibration and good sound. It might come to you as a surprise, but the reason why most players have trouble in very high range are identical to the low pedal range. It's just that the symptoms of the problem are on the opposite ends of the spectrum. So what do I mean by that? In both scenarios, it's more than likely that the issue stems from inability to blow correct airspeed while controlling tension and space levels in your aperture. As you go higher, the airspeed has to increase for your lips to vibrate faster. The workload in your facial muscles, or in other words, tension, will increase due to higher levels of resistance. As you play higher and higher, you are likely to either lose ability to keep your lips closed enough to maintain vibration due to facial muscles giving out because of resistance turning your sound into an airball, or you might subconsciously react to increased resistance by increasing the tension levels in your embouchure so much that the air cannot escape your mouth anymore, resulting into a complete blockage of air. No matter how great of a player you are and how good of a range you have, if you keep on playing higher and higher, one of those two things will happen eventually. This is simply inevitable due to our physical limitations. However, you can significantly expand your range by constantly practicing fundamental areas like air and aperture coordination through exercises like this. On the opposite end, as you play lower into your pedal register, the tension levels are extremely low for your lips to vibrate. Even though you are moving slow air, you want to make sure you don't open your aperture too wide to the point where your lips don't even vibrate anymore, you don't have any control over your pitch. Both high and low ranges present same airspeed and aperture control issues, even though physically it might feel very different as you play on the opposite ends of your range. Another area that I start paying more and more attention to as my routine progresses is not being slow with my finger movement. A tendency I notice with a lot of players as they start incorporating one of the variations of this exercise is as soon as they get closer to the top of their range, their fingers start moving slowly and in a very hesitant manner. Air is only moving freely through valve tubes when the valves are fully up or down, and during that split second when you move your fingers too slow, the resistance might increase so much that it will result into loss of pitch or chipped note. The worst thing about it is that you might not even be aware of that, thinking that it is an aperture or an airspeed problem. This might mislead you into taking wrong practice approaches as a result. Just something to keep in mind as you play these slow, rangy exercises. Lastly, I'm once again doing this exercise with tuba drones. This exercise is awesome in the sense that more or less every single pitch in my range will be played by the time it's completed, and I will have a chance to practice recognizing my intonation on a variety of intervals in relation to the route that the tuba drone is playing. With all of this in mind, make sure you can handle all the variables your exercises present to you before starting to practice some of the more complicated stuff. A good idea would be to start this exercise in 1 octave and gradually make it into 2, then 3, and eventually a 4-octave exercise. Once you're comfortable with that, add a metronome for breath timing, then drones for intonation, and so on. There's no limit to how good you can get at this exercise, but you will set yourself for a failure if you try skipping steps by picking exercises that you cannot execute with quality. Next, we'll move on to a flexibility pattern, but before we do that, a quick shout out goes to dfmusicking.com. Instrument I used in this video, the JP274S, is available for purchase at their online store, and you can get a 10% discount when using a discount code Matonizz at the checkout. Get your quality Dennis Wick and John Packer products from a trustworthy distributor without overpaying thousands of dollars for your equipment. Visit dfmusicking.com and get your 10% off with the promo code Matonizz. Again, it's 10% off with the promo code Matonizz at the checkout. With that out of the way, the following exercise is a new addition to my arsenal, even though it's not necessarily some sort of a very innovative or new pattern that no one has heard before. The reason why I decided to add this flexibility exercise to my routine was because I was tracking the progress of all my previous flexibility exercises through slow but gradual tempo increments, and it got to the point where all of my free flexibility exercises became somewhat fast, taking away from my ability to practice slow, smooth slurring. This and the previous exercises are similar in the way that they both require a lot of control to execute correctly. However, while the previous exercise presented much more of a challenge for inhale pattern and wider register, this exercise emphasizes extreme centering since there is no centering help from changing finger combinations. Nothing all that much different in the approach, except for you have to be really precise with controlling aperture space and airspeed. As you jump these larger intervals, it is very easy to overblow your air or to oversqueeze your face. I'm focusing on making controlled transitions with as minor changes in my airspeed and aperture as possible as I slur. If I miss any of these intervals, I simply restart. However, I make sure I get the pattern with almost a whistle-like sensation before I move up a half step. This will be more and more crucial as you go higher in range and the margin for error in centering becomes very small. Again, all of this while maintaining solid breathing pattern as well as good intonation. I maintain metronome at 60 beats per minute throughout the exercise as well as tuba drones for pitch reference. Exercise 9 is where we start practicing all the fun stuff. This exercise puts a lot of emphasis on fingers and range. I'm really focused on moving a consistent airstream as I press my valves very firmly. The tendency is to start bouncing your airstream in sync with your valve movement. I'm trying to make sure that despite of a quick and very firm valve action, there is no change in the amount of tension in my face or consistency in my airstream. The reason why I'm pressing my valves harder than normal is for my brain to lock in precise and quick finger movement as I literally go through every possible finger combination there is. It's a wonderful exercise that can be used to improve finger motion, range, or even as a warm-up exercise because it starts in low register, then gradually engages your facial muscles more as you go up, and then relaxes your embouchure on your way down. I play this exercise at 80 beats per minute and without tuba drones this time. This is always one of the more fun exercises to practice because who doesn't like fast slurs? I have to be honest here, this particular exercise is not as carefully planned out as all the other stuff I do, at least those fast 30-second note arpeggios. It's impressive and it shows your centering ability, but at that speed it's more of an extended technique itself rather than an actual slur. The first half of the exercise is very beneficial in terms of being able to control your centering in this low of a register, and it's not like playing those 30-second notes have no benefit, but I do it mostly for fun just because it sounds pretty cool, just being transparent here. With that in mind, I play this exercise at 100 beats per minute and I maintain both 16th and 32nd note pattern until it becomes a bit too low for the 32nd notes to come out, and then I basically proceed with only the 16th notes going down. Sometimes I can go almost all the way to the bottom maintaining those 32nd notes and sometimes just halfway through. I never spend much time on this, usually 1 or 2 attempts at most. I really don't think that playing this exercise in this particular manner teaches me all that much. Again, not saying it's a waste of time, but at the same time I'm doing this more for fun and just to take a small mental break from all the concentration demanding practice that I've done prior by this time. As I progress into my routine, the exercises I select are something that I often refer to as application exercises. When you play a texture this complicated, you're not really thinking about your breathing or aperture in such a great detail as you would when playing slow slurs or variation of long tones. What I'm focused here is really thinking as little as possible about technical side and just relying on the habits and instincts I've already acquired throughout decades of practicing. I'm trying to focus as much on having the intervals in my head and not being sloppy when articulating the bass line. Any hesitation or uncoordinated breathing as well as slow tongue motion will instantly result into either losing speed or chipping away every other note basically. No deep analysis here to be fair, again, I'm just applying the fundamentals of centering and air control at a somewhat extreme level. I play through this exercise once at 110 beats per minute with no drones. Same as previous 2 exercises, this flexibility pattern would not be a great way to develop your fundamentals, but it's pretty awesome when it comes to applying them. Unlike other 2 flexibility exercises I played prior, this might not be as fast but rather wider in range and selection of the intervals. Again, I'm not really paying attention to my breathing so much at this point. It will be very obvious if it's not on point, since you will be splitting a lot of notes in an exercise with a texture like this, especially if you have faulty basics. I'm not just trying to stay composed, but have the intervals in my head and focus on not hesitating whatsoever before starting the pattern or as I change intervals in multiple octaves. I play everything at 145 beats per minute with drones. Last point of focus in my routine is tongue. Having solid articulation is crucial from good musicianship and technique standpoint. However, that's the last point of coordination that I go in depth to in my routine. There are no exercises you can get away with without having to breathe or buzz your lips. You will be very limited if you can't use your fingers. However, you can still practice and play through many exercises without having to use articulation much at all. Not saying it is less important, because that's not true. It's just the way I structure my personal and my student routines that revolves around starting with as few variables to focus on before adding more things to think about as you become more comfortable during the routine. Articulation just so happens to be the last one, but for sure not the least. From my personal experience, developing consistency in articulation is far more complicated than developing speed. Therefore, vast majority of my tongue practice is done in longer groups of notes. With every single pattern I increase the speed, but it's only relevant to me for as long as I can sustain it within these extended patterns. I'm focusing on getting my tongue out of the way of an airstream as quickly as possible and making sure that my tongue is moving in a controlled and small range of motion, similar to as if I was trying to spit. In musical terms, this will give you a clear front of a note, and from technical standpoint, this will move away your tongue from the airstream quickly enough to avoid any substantial air blockage. This, in a way, is similar to valve problem I was talking about earlier. Sometimes if you just move your tongue a tiny bit too slow, you might build up a lot of resistance for a fraction of a second, which will cause a lot of tension in your face. If you're not aware of this problem, which is a very easy thing to do since we cannot see our tongue movement, it might mislead you into looking for a solution in the wrong place. So again, even though I practice my tongue coordination at the end of my routine, it is not something I treat lightly at all or ever skip in my practice. I start at 70 beats per minute, adding 5 clicks per scale as I go through the cycle of fifths, which takes me all the way to 125 beats per minute per quarter note at the end. The length of a pattern allows me to practice consistency and stamina. Change of scales gives me a different look for range and finger coordination, as well as constantly increasing tempo allows me to practice speed of my tongue as I go along with the exercise. I end this exercise with a slightly different pattern at 130 beats per minute, which is same length pattern except for it's on a singular pitch. This speed is close to my maximum single tongue speed that I can sustain for that pattern. Once it becomes so easy that I can play it effortlessly day after day after day, that is usually a good sign that it's time to add 1 or 2 clicks to the overall exercise tempo, which usually takes me around 6 to 12 months at the level that I am to do. I can tongue faster in shorter groups of notes, but it's quite irrelevant since in reality I usually switch to double tongue right around 120 beats per minute if I was playing a piece. Therefore, I'm always much more concerned about developing consistency and stamina through controlling range of motion that my tongue moves at, while keeping speed as a secondary goal. If you're less confident with your articulation technique, I would recommend applying same approach in terms of progression and length of the patterns used. However, I would normally prescribe a singular pitch pattern which takes away the element of fingering from the list of things you have to worry about. That's the same exact reason why the last pattern I play in this exercise is on a single concert B-flat pitch. The speed gets to the point where it's better for me just to focus on light, quick, short tongue movement instead of having to worry about correct finger combinations. With that in mind, for the largest portion of this exercise, I am practicing both my tongue and fingers through the use of melodic minor scales. I always start with melodic and harmonic minor because these are less commonly used scales, whereas both major and minor I get to practice a lot through simply playing my pieces. I play this exercise along with tuba drones once again for pitch reference. I follow up with a set of triple tongue exercises. It is designed to improve stamina, speed, and finger coordination. Because of the very few live performances since March, I had time to learn a new syllable combination for triple tongue that I wasn't all that good at before. Most of you are familiar with dadaga and dagada or tataka and takata. However, the syllable combination I've been working on for the last 6 months has been daga, which had a very positive impact on my overall triple tongue speed, consistency, and stamina. The downside so far has been the lack of my tongue and finger coordination, so that's the predominant reason why I've been incorporating as many as 3 exercises for less commonly used techniques such as triple tongue. The reason I decided to change my syllable combination though was because I figured that at least in theory, the inconsistency and speed issues in triple tongue occur when we have to repeat the same syllable twice in a row, which in the other 2 patterns are da or ta based on which one you're using every 3 notes. By using daga, you completely eliminate that problem, and when it comes to speed and stamina, I did notice a significant improvement very quickly, which at my level does not normally happen. However, by using daga, now you are introducing a weak syllable, which is a ga, on a strong portion of a triplet, which is the very first note of every other group of 3 notes. I got much better at it in the last 6 months, enough to convince me to stick with this syllable combination at least for now, but it is still a bit less coordinated than the other 2 patterns that I've been doing for many years now. Again, I'm going to keep on practicing this for at least the remainder of the year, and then it will be interesting to reassess and share with you my thoughts on the effectiveness of this technique. Right around 109 beats per minute per quarter note is where I start feeling that my fingers and tongue become a bit less coordinated as I get to the second half of this pattern consisting out of 15 groups of triplets. Therefore, the goal is to build up to that particular speed on a daily basis until the last pattern at 109 beats per minute not only starts sounding good but also feels consistent and effortless for multiple days in a row. That's where I would normally adjust the overall speed by 2 or 3 clicks. I prefer starting this pattern at 70 beats per minute because it is slow enough to expose any control issues. If I was performing a piece, I would single tongue at this speed. However, practicing triple tongue this slow helps me to avoid any choppy, swung sounding triplets as the speed increases later. For me to start at 70 beats per minute and finish the cycle of fifths at 109 beats per minute, I make 4 click increments until I reach 94 beats per minute on a concert D-flat harmonic minor scale. Then I switch to 3 click increments for the remainder of the exercise. I play everything in harmonic minor, so in a way I'm working my fingers also, but the main goal is obviously getting better at triple tongue. Next exercise is an extension of a previous exercise, and as I've mentioned, at around 109 beats per minute is where I start noticing a lack of coordination appearing as I play longer groups of triplets. Unlike single tongue, where as soon as it becomes a bit too fast I can hit a second here and switch to double tongue, I do not have an alternative option once I max out in speed on my triple tongue. Therefore, putting some extra emphasis on triple tongue speed training is something I incorporate in my routine. If your sole focus is speed, then it would be a good idea to practice triple tongue in patterns as short as 1 or 2 groups of triplets at a time. And even though I just mentioned that speed is an area of concern for me, I'm somewhat convinced that it is less of a tongue movement problem and more of a finger and tongue coordination issue. What led me to this conclusion is the fact that I can triple tongue same length pattern of 15 groups of triplets at around 122 beats per minute somewhat comfortably as long as the pattern stays on a single pitch. This indicates to me that the problem is not necessarily a slow tongue movement but rather coordination between tongue and fingers. So why am I bringing this up? As I've stated earlier, my goal with this exercise is to establish speed, which is normally practiced more efficiently in shorter groups of notes. However, since the area that is giving me trouble is not necessarily my tongue speed, I decreased the length of the overall pattern by half, which makes the exercise manageable, but at the same time allows me to practice finger coordination while tonguing somewhat fast. I start this exercise at 112 beats per minute and build it up to 122 beats per minute. At the same time, I want to play through all the natural minor scales to make sure I go through all my scales in my routine. This takes me to 2 click increments every 2 scales. As I've mentioned multiple times before, coordination when using the daga-daga-daga syllable combination has been an area of concern for me. Both previous triple tongue exercises offer changing pitches with every triplet group, which allows me to practice the coordination aspect. However, I wanted to make sure that one of the exercises has all the emphasis put on it, which in practice means a pattern with more frequent pitch change. When I was trying to determine what exercise to add for that purpose, I was considering things like functionality, level of difficulty, as well as potential opportunity to learn something new. I wanted to be a more sustained, or in other words, a longer pattern, which led me to originally looking through some of the Arbin exercises. As I was playing them through, I found that the exercises that were long enough looked a little bit more like etudes rather than a simple up and down scale pattern. Having everything memorized is surprisingly a very important element of my routine. Not only I don't have an ability to carry a bunch of books with me at all the time, but it also makes it very inconvenient when teaching or running some sort of a live masterclass. Therefore, I figured I might as well write something myself that will be somewhat new and interesting. At the time I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, I was also practicing pieces for the River City Brass concert series. Most of the pieces do not present me new looks in terms of patterns or interval combinations, so normally I'm less concerned about practicing fingers than I am understanding the musical purposes of various articulations and dynamic markings. However, one of the pieces had a blue scale pattern which I realized needed some slow practice for my fingers. As I was practicing it, not only I realized that I don't know my blue scales all that well, but also that it could be used in triplet patterns very well, because unlike major and minor scales, it has 6 and not 7 different pitches before reaching the octave interval. I sat down, wrote out all the blue scales, and basically what you're seeing right now is a result of that. I started playing through all of them once or twice a day. Within a month or so I had all of them memorized, and this is basically how I gave myself an opportunity to not only practice the desired skill but also learn something new. Blue scales are not something I invented, but it is rarely practiced in this context. I currently practice this exercise at 89 beats per minute. The reason for that is because once I started incorporating this exercise into my routine, I found that a good starting tempo was 85 beats per minute. It did not feel particularly comfortable, but at the same time it was manageable, which is exactly what everyone should be looking for from their exercises. Since then I've made speed increments twice by 2 clicks each time, which has led me to my current 89 beat per minute speed. Once this becomes an absolute breeze, I will be increasing the overall speed to 91 beats per minute. Before we move to the last 2 exercises on my routine, I wanted to quickly remind you all that all the materials with the drones used in this video will be available for download at patreon.com/Matonizz. So go check it out if you'd like to support the channel, as well as receive other cool perks such as arrangements, original compositions, and more. If you're interested in online lessons, do not hesitate to get in touch with me through euphonium.legends@gmail.com. I'll put my email in the description box below, so if you'd like to know more about pricing in different packages, send me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. With that in mind, the second to last exercise for the day is a weak syllable training. This whole exercise is dedicated to improving the coordination, accuracy, and consistency of my ga syllable. I articulate every single note in this exercise on ga, and the goal is to try and get it to sound as clear as possible, which is much trickier to do on gas than your das. It is very hard to control your tongue movement because you cannot see your tongue. That takes away the main method which most of us learn through, the visual way of learning. On top of that, tongue is not a limb that we're designed to have an extreme precision control of in comparison to limbs like your fingers. It makes it much harder to understand how your tongue is supposed to be moving as you articulate, as well as what is that short, controlled range of motion that I keep on bringing up so often. This is something called kinesthetic learning, or in other words, learning through feeling rather than seeing or hearing, which most of us are much more used to doing. Unfortunately, I cannot give you an instant way of correcting your tongue motion. However, the most effective way of explaining this in my personal experience is through telling a person what to look for. For example, getting your tongue out of the way quickly, or moving your tongue in a short, precise motion, almost as if you're trying to spit. If you practice an exercise long enough to where it becomes a second nature, you will notice that you have more control over other senses like your tongue and aperture, allowing you to make these small, subtle adjustments for a substantial progress in your playing. The reason I'm telling you this is because throughout years of practicing articulation, I found that I got very good at feeling how my tongue moves. However, even to this day, I can't really tell all that well what is happening with my tongue as I play my ga syllables. Don't get me wrong, I do understand how my tongue moves, but the level of control is not to the point where I could tell the difference between good and great range of motion. The adjustment I've made in order to strengthen the weak syllable and bring more clarity, speed, and coordination was to simply rely on listening to how it sounds rather than try to feel it. If it sounds similar to an okay single tongue, my quality standards for that pattern are usually met. Not that I'm not trying to make my ga sound great, but at least this gives me a reference point that allows me to track in somewhat acceptable fashion the progress that I make. When I started practicing this exercise, originally the tempo was 70 beats per minute. Since then I made 5 speed increments, first of 3 which were 5 clicks each, building my tempo to 85 beats per minute. After that I tried bumping it up to 90 beats per minute and it worked on vast majority of the exercise, but my tongue would get so fatigued by the end of it that the quality was unacceptable anymore. Therefore, I scaled back to 85 beats per minute and have been making 2-click increments since then, which just so happens to align identically to the progress of my triple tongue blues scales, if some of you wondered why both exercises are played in this awkward 89 beat per minute tempo. Outside of that, I play through full cycle of fifths and major scales and use drones to supplement my ability to listen for intonation as I play. Last, and in fact the least, is double tongue. Despite the ridiculousness of the statement, it is true in my case. This exercise is a great way to practice your double tongue, but for me personally, double tongue is something that not only comes out quite effortlessly despite how much I practice it, but I spend so much time on the da-ga combination in my triple tongue exercises that I'm very convinced I would not miss a beat if I simply skipped this exercise. However, just to make sure I get in the whole tone scales in my practice on a regular basis, I play through it as a double tongue exercise at 145 beats per minute. Again, looking for good clarity and consistency here. And this will sum up the third update of my practice routine throughout the last couple of years. I really wanted to bring up the thought process behind the structure, selection of the exercises, and the application to practicing those exercises, so you would all be able to understand what practicing smart, at least in my definition, means. Apologies for being late to upload this video, but hopefully you can see why this would take so much time. In fact, the main reason for me taking a break from these educational videos was because I wanted to try and stick to a weekly upload schedule. I most sincerely don't believe that the short, vague tutorial videos help all that much, especially when you try to cover a very complicated subject that normally stems from decades of learning and practice experience, subjects such as structuring your routine and applying practice correctly. But at the same time, these videos take a very long time to complete with the quality standards that I have for myself and my content. Again, thank you so much for the milestone support on Patreon and the 25,000 subscriber mark. I'm determined to bring back these educational videos to a monthly upload schedule moving on. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you found this useful. Have a great rest of the week, friends, and take care, everyone.